Steve Wozniak made an interesting comment yesterday, if you were at the talk, that basically Apple had brought fun to computers. And I think the Turing Festival has brought a lot of fun to these technology conversations and discussions. So thanks to National Geographic as well for organizing the panel and for Turing Festival, all the volunteers and everybody else. I want to talk about maps. I'm passionate about maps. I'm fascinated about maps. But I don't want to talk about ordinary kind of maps. I want to talk about the kinds of maps that can change the world, maps that can even save lives. So I want to take you back to a fateful day, January 12th, 2010. A devastating earthquake struck Haiti, and over 100,000 people were feared dead. Within days, signs like these started to appear across the capital city of Port-au-Prince. Pleas for help, calls for help. But of course, if you were the humanitarian in that chopper flying overhead, you're not seeing these individual pleas for help. You're not listening and hearing these voices. Now, I had really close friends who were in Port-au-Prince at the time, and I had no idea whether they were dead or alive. And it was only after midnight that same day that I finally got an SMS reply and found out they had just narrowly escaped a collapsing building. But of course, many, many other people were not okay in Port-au-Prince. So I decided to launch a live crisis map of Haiti using the Ushahidi platform. The Ushahidi platform is basically a free and open source mapping technology made in Africa. Ushahidi means witness in Swahili. And the best way to think about the technology is simply like a multimedia inbox connected to a live map. So we're all familiar with inboxes. We've got too many emails coming in. This inbox takes in other kinds of media as well, like pictures and video and so on, and RSS feeds. So what I did that evening, just hours after the earthquake struck, was get online and look for Twitter users in Haiti. And sure enough, there were dozens of Haitians who were on Twitter and tweeting live about the devastation that they were witnessing. And so what I did was simply map that particular witnessing, because they would often say, the church at this corner has collapsed, or this bridge, or this other piece of infrastructure, or people need help. But within about 48 hours later, I couldn't keep up with all the information that was coming on social media, as well as the mainstream media started going 24/7 as well. So I was doing my PhD at Tufts University in Boston at the time. So I reached out to my fellow classmates and friends, and I basically said, listen, hi, I know it's winter break, but I'm trying to map Haiti, and I need all the help I can get. And that next evening, a few dozen friends of mine showed up, and they stayed up with me the entire night, and started snowing outside. It was really surreal. Here we were, all rather quiet at times, just mapping Haiti. So we were not only looking at Twitter, but we started looking at literally hundreds of different URLs that we had in the Google spreadsheet, and just monitoring that. We set up like a sign-up sheet. Okay, I've got BBC News from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m., and I'll just follow that. But all that done very, very manually. And actually, this one person here, Chrissy, was one of the survivors of the earthquake who I mentioned. So she had been basically evacuated a couple days later, got to the airport in Boston, and went straight to my place to basically sit down and help us map, because she just felt a lot of remorse of having left, a lot of guilt of having seen what she saw and not being able to help, but she figured, okay, at least I can come and help map Haiti. But I should say that when I decided to start this map after seeing the news on CNN, I had no plan. I was just winging it. We were all winging it. It was an emotional reaction. We were just trying to find a way to help. So you can imagine 10 days later, our shock and surprise when the head of FEMA, which is the main US humanitarian disaster response agency, went on Twitter and basically referenced our map as the most comprehensive and up-to-date map available to the humanitarian community. We saw that, we're like, what? You've got to be joking. But sure enough, and then this is what the actual Ushahidi map looked like at the height of operations. These numbers that you see here are the number of reports in that particular location. So if you actually zoom in further, say the number 22 here, you could zoom in even more and see 22 individually marked geotagged reports of calls for help and pleas for help. This was really no ordinary map, because this map never looked the same for more than 5 to 10 minutes, because there were hundreds of volunteers. And I should say, you know, a dozen volunteers showed up that first evening, and then a dozen more that the following evening. And by the end of that first week, we had over 100 volunteers, undergraduate students showing up at 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning during winter break to help map Haiti in a seminar room just like this one, packed with undergraduate students who just wanted to help. And so because of all these individuals, we were able to map Haiti live 24/7, and we were always adding something new to this map. So it really did not look the same for more than 5 to 10 minutes. It was like an organism. It was like a biological system that was evolving over time. So here we were in snowy Boston, a bunch of volunteers who'd never done anything like this, because really nothing like this had ever happened before, using free and open source software made in Africa, made in Kenya, years before that, saving hundreds of lives in Haiti without ever setting foot in Haiti. And there was a rumor going around apparently within the UN in Port-au-Prince, where are all these guys? Where are the Ushahidi organization? You know, they must be down here somewhere in Port-au-Prince. The truth is we were 1,500 miles north of Port-au-Prince and never there. And it turns out, again, not our plan, that the US Marine Corps, as well as the US Coast Guard, made operational use of this live crowdsourced map. They literally, this is the US Marine Corps specifically, literally were sending out choppers based on what they were seeing on this map, new information coming up. And they have examples. They sent us an email that we've been actually made public on the National Geographic blog a couple months ago, where they say, we've been able to save hundreds of lives thanks to your volunteer efforts. And they give us one example of women who needed emergency medical evacuation. And thanks to this map, they were able to get them the need and relief that they required. But this whole example of organic, volunteer-based, crowdsourcing crisis information, crowdsourcing this live map that was the most comprehensive, up-to-date map available to the humanitarian community would not have been possible for this particular map. So when we started mapping Haiti that very night, hours after the earthquake, we went on Google Maps, and you looked at the Google map of downtown Port-au-Prince at the time, and half the city was missing. Why? Well, because for Google Inc., Port-au-Prince isn't exactly a place where they're going to make a lot of money. It's not a commercial, if you like, priority for them. And that made it really difficult for us, because here we were monitoring information in the social media space, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Flickr, and all that. And people referencing an orphanage or referencing a particular street. Well, there's no sign of this street on Google Maps for that particular neighborhood in Pétionville, for example. So how the heck do we map that? Enter another crowdsourcing initiative. So OpenStreetMap is sort of like the anti-Google Maps. They're the open data, sharing, open information community, and they basically crowdsource maps, street maps all around the world. They've got a very active user community, and they started basically mobilizing also within days after the earthquake. And this is an animation of basically this in action. What they were able to do is get high-resolution satellite imagery and aerial imagery from the World Bank, who had basically sent out a drone to fly over Port-au-Prince and get that imagery back. And then they used basically their own volunteer community to trace that particular imagery on the OpenStreetMap. And so here's an animation of all these edits that were taking place over about 2-3 weeks. So January 12th is when the earthquake strikes. You can see these flashes of lights like synapses going off, sort of brain activity, right? Each represent a single edit that one of about 700 volunteers made. A total of over 1.4 million edits were made to this map and crowdsourced over this particular period. And we didn't even have to wait till the end of January to start using this map. Within 2 or 3 days, the map that they had started to crowdsource and trace from satellite imagery was already far more detailed than Google Maps was able to provide. So within just a few days, you had the most comprehensive, detailed street map of downtown Port-au-Prince, which allowed us to do what we were able to do. Now, of course, most Haitians are not going to be behind their laptops or desktops during this disaster and crisis, let alone have access or even own a desktop. So we knew that if we were going to have real impact to those who were in need, it was going to have to start with this particular technology, the cell phones. Most of the cell phone towers that had been affected were back up and operational within 24 or 48 hours. Already I got that SMS back at 2 a.m. in the morning, about 10 hours after the earthquake. So we were starting to see some SMS traffic happening. So we knew that we needed to get down right to where the individuals were. And it just so happens that about 80% of Haitian households have access to a mobile phone, which is an incredibly high number. So a friend of mine, Josh Nesbitt, went on Twitter the day after the earthquake and said, I'm looking for an SMS gateway for this Haiti map. Can anybody help? Within about an hour, somebody who was following him on Twitter in Cameroon, and he was in Washington, D.C., replied and said, yes, my cousin works for the main telecommunications company in Port-au-Prince. I'll put you in touch. By the end of that day, we were in touch with Digicel, this telecommunications company, and we had secured or borrowed from them a free shortcode, a free SMS number that allowed anyone in Haiti to text us for free with their most urgent needs and their location. Now again, none of us knew whether this was going to work, right? We're winging it. And I hope I'm not giving the impression that we're professional. This was messy, it was organic, they were just, we were really making it up as we went along. So we didn't know this was going to work, but sure enough, once we set up this number and worked with some partners of ours in Port-au-Prince who went from radio station to radio station, there were about 26 community radio stations. All of them remained operational throughout. They broadcast this information. The number was 4636. And we started getting hundreds and thousands of text messages. This is a Wordle, just a graphic, that represents the most frequently used words in these text messages that we received during the first 2 weeks. And you can see, for me, one of the reasons I like sharing this slide is one of the most frequent words is please. So here's a population that's just gone through one of their most, if not the most traumatic moments of their lives psychologically, almost certainly has lost one or more loved ones. And here they are getting on their SMSs and say, please, I'm here, I need help, my sister's stuck under the rubble. Now, of course, none of the text messages that we were receiving from these disaster-affected populations in Haiti were in English. Not a single one of these text messages that we received were in English. None of these words actually appeared in English. They were obviously coming into us in Haitian Creole, a few in French, but then again, very Creole, sort of Haitian French, but the vast majority in Haitian Creole. None of us spoke a word of Haitian Creole, and here we were receiving thousands and thousands and thousands of text messages. So very, very quickly, we decided to crowdsource the translation. Overnight, built a crowdsourcing platform that allowed for the translation of these text messages, sort of microtasking, distributed microtasking. And who did we go to? Or where did we get help? Well, we went on Facebook. Why on Facebook? Well, because the Haitian diaspora in the United States and abroad were organizing themselves already on Facebook. So we went to these different Facebook groups and posted, say, hi, you don't know us? We're trying to translate thousands, potentially more, of text messages coming from disaster-affected individuals in your own country. Can you help us? And they sure did. Obviously, not only were they able to translate these text messages for us, but they were able to geolocate these text messages. They were far more obviously familiar with downtown Port-au-Prince and the different streets than we were. And here is basically a map of these volunteers. Over 1,200 individual volunteers from about 30, more actually, I think it was 39 different countries, logged into our crowdsourcing translation platform. This is based on their ISP addresses, so we were able to capture that, to translate some 40,000 text messages. Mostly in near real time. The average turnaround time per text message was 10 minutes. So as soon as a text message left a mobile phone somewhere in Port-au-Prince, potentially under the rubble, in fact, 10 minutes later, we had that text message translated and geolocated and up on that live crisis map of Haiti, enabling then the US Marine Corps and the US Coast Guard to literally send out the choppers to go and rescue people. One thing I want to note, though, is that these are not just dots on a map. These are real people with real lives, with plenty of other things to do, work, children, taking care of elderly, going to conferences, you name it. And here they were, still taking hours of their own time, usually in the very late night, early hours of the morning, translating very difficult text messages. I mean, it was traumatic to read these text messages. I had to stop myself after a while. Very graphic text messages and thousands of pleas for help coming at you day and night, day and night, day and night. Why did they do that? Well, because they could, because these technologies allowed them to be human. And in fact, I think these technologies allow us to translate this initial emotional reaction that we might have, like I did when I watched CNN that Tuesday afternoon. Translating that emotional reaction that perhaps is initially just completely private into a public emotion, reaching out, doing something about it. And here they were, thousands of miles away, some in northern Finland, right? Translating these text messages for people who they would never meet halfway across the world. I think that's just a real testament to what we can all do as digital volunteers now by simply spending time on our laptop, you know, beyond just watching sort of LOL cats videos and pictures. So what's fascinating about these life maps, if you think about it, this is a quote I got off a security expert a year ago, is that they're almost like having your own helicopter. I mean, think about it. They give you a bird's eye view of events that are unfolding across space and time, perhaps thousands of miles away. You don't have to be there, but you can actually see things unfolding. And you know, I've been wanting to be a pilot, an airline pilot, since the age of 5, but these glasses kind of got in the way. But here's like my chance now to take my own sort of digital helicopter and be an explorer, be a digital explorer. There's just one slight problem with that plan. More than 4 million miles of satellite imagery is produced. 4 million miles, not produced every month, every week, but every single day. So how do you deal with that amount of exploration that is basically there for you to venture into and learn from and so on? Is it maybe getting the best helicopter on the planet, which we all know is Airwolf, right? But even with Airwolf, I bet you we couldn't possibly traverse and cover 4 million miles of new satellite imagery. And you can imagine the kinds of things that we can discover with this imagery, from Sarah at Nat Geo, who's looking at using this for identifying new evidence of pyramids and other artifacts in Egypt. So how do we, I can't do that. I mean, you know, Albert on his own can't do that either. Well, it turns out that Susan and Albert had the answer all along. Now, I hadn't met them at the time when I came across this phenomenal project, the Valley of the Khans. So what Susan and Albert decided to do was crowdsource the navigation, crowdsource the exploration for signs of evidence of Genghis Khan's tomb, an 800-year-old mystery. So the answer here to this 4 million mile question was not, let's get the best pilot, let's get the best helicopter, Airwolf. It was, let's get hundreds of pilots, let's get hundreds of helicopters, and let's people basically take off in these digital helicopters and basically fly over this vast virtual landscape that is Mongolia. I thought that was phenomenal. This is exactly the world that I want to be in. And so I've been an avid blogger on humanitarian technology, how we can take new innovations in the humanitarian space and applying that to address and solve very large, difficult humanitarian problems. And I had thought about this idea of crowdsourcing and satellite imagery already 2 years ago during the Pakistan floods, because I wanted to use this approach. But I didn't have that missing piece of the puzzle, which was this TomNod platform that Albert will tell you a bit more about later. And so I blogged about that and said, check this out. Look what National Geographic did in Mongolia. We could use this idea of crowdsourcing and microtasking for satellite imagery on humanitarian crises. And sure enough, a few months after I wrote that blog post, things were starting to get really dire in the Horn of Africa, mostly as a result of this massive, massive drought that was displacing people, coupled with fighting and al-Shabaab's terrorist activities in the region. What we had was a massive displacement of IDPs, internally displaced peoples, outside of Mogadishu into the western part of the country, an area called the Afguye corridor. So my colleagues from UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, basically got in touch with me and said, all right, Patrick, let's put your ideas to the test. You say we can do this, let's do this. Let's take Somalia and see if we can use this idea of crowdsourcing and satellite imagery, because what we really need to know is we need to know exactly how many people are being forcibly, most of them, displaced into this corridor. Because unless we know how many people we're dealing with, how do we best then target our humanitarian relief operations? So the idea was, can we use this satellite imagery to identify evidence of IDP camps and shelters? Now, normally, the UN would do this in the field. They would do this on the ground, travel to the areas, do the surveys, and so on. But as I mentioned, Al-Shabaab, was a terrorist group, was basically targeting humanitarians and kidnapping them as well. So the only way in this particular situation to get anything done in this case was to take this problem to the skies. It was time to fly, basically, and the UN was in dire need of pilots. So we partnered with Albert's group, and they very kindly customized their TomNod platform for Syria. And the way that it works is you can take tons of satellite imagery, for example, right here near Mogadishu. And what TomNod will do is slice up that imagery into tiny little bits of pictures that then volunteers can go on and look for signs of formal or informal temporary shelters. And the great thing about the TomNod platform is it's got a built-in quality control mechanism. So every image was viewed by at least 3 volunteers. And if only, say, one particular feature was tagged as an informal shelter or a temporary shelter, by 3 individual volunteers would that data point get triangulated and pushed to UNHCR. And so within basically 120 hours, volunteers created over 250,000 tags after analyzing over close to 4,000 images. And then using TomNod's built-in consensus algorithms and so on, we were able to come up with a rough figure of about 47,000 shelters, which UNHCR could then take to get a better sense and to potentially triangulate with other figures that they might have had. It's important to note that when UNHCR did this 2 years ago, they had 2 staff work on it for an entire month. 2 staff paid, who could be doing other things, an entire month, 30 days. This was 120 hours that volunteers did this. And obviously 120 hours kind of matters rather than an entire month when you're talking about disaster response. You don't have the luxury of waiting for an entire month in humanitarian crises. So this was a definite first. And we were able to do this again in Syria because our colleagues at Amnesty International got wind of what we'd done and said, all right, we have a lot of evidence of mass atrocities being committed in Syria, but we want to have another medium to help us corroborate that evidence. So in human rights monitoring and the human rights work, what professionals need to do is not only gather as much evidence as possible, but as much different sources of channels of evidence to try and make it more and more difficult for regimes like in Syria to dismiss or discredit the findings. So we did exactly the same thing, except this time we were looking for evidence of mass destruction, checkpoints, as well as heavy military equipment. Now, when I say we, who do I actually mean? Well, I mean a group called the Standby Volunteer Task Force. This is a network of about 900 volunteers based in 80 different countries around the world who are basically the go-to people for many humanitarian and human rights organizations now. Informal network, they're not a 501c, they're not a nonprofit organization or a charity or any kind of legal entity. They're just a Google group of people who we've trained over the past 2 years or so on how to do this kind of live crisis mapping in support of humanitarian and human rights organizations. And they basically self-organize in these different teams. You have one team that does geolocation, and their whole purpose in life is to find GPS coordinates for whatever is thrown at them. And they've gotten pretty darn good at it as well. We've got a verification team as well. If we're doing media monitoring of social media, this verification team has developed interesting heuristics and tactics and strategies on how to verify crowdsourced content, which, by the way, the BBC and Al Jazeera and the UK Guardian have also learned quite a bit from because we've shared our tactics and strategies with them. So these folks are really the Jedis of the mapping world. And so I bet you're asking, yeah, how do I become one of these Jedis, right? Well, the group is really open to everyone, absolutely everyone. One of our oldest volunteers is in his 80s, the youngest is a 14-year-old in Tokyo, Japan. No prior skills necessary. The idea here is anybody can change the world. If we get together and network and we've got these different technologies to help us do that, we can make a big impact. You can just be on your Apple or PC or whatever on a Friday evening and you don't feel like going out, well, you could just come and help map the Libyan crisis or the Syrian crisis for the United Nations and other organizations. So that's sort of what's been done, which is pretty darn cool, I think. Where are we going? One area I'd like to go is to, map flowers, not war, to get beyond this idea of only mapping bad things, because it can really get to you. So a little variety would be really great, which is one of the reasons why I'm very excited to be part of this National Geographic team, to see how we can start using this crowdsourcing virtual digital exploration for things not only applying to humanitarian crises, but other things. And I can tell you, many of these volunteers who are part of this demo task force would love to do something like look at aerial imagery of the Arctic to find polar bears, right? They're just a very engaged group and open to all kinds of different exploration. In terms of technologies, we may get to sort of the Star Wars idea of holographic 3D live mapping, but since this is a Nat Geo panel, maybe James Cameron will get upset. So Avatar, right? This kind of immersive 3D live mapping kind of technology would be pretty darn cool, I think. So I wanted to end with this slide. National Geographic, at the end of the day, is based in Washington, D.C., and our expedition has gone from Haiti and Somalia. So I wanted to bring it back to Washington, D.C. And in fact, I realized not too long ago that National Geographic magazine, the first one that came out in 1888, one of the main articles was about a massive snowstorm that had hit North England and paralyzed the entire region. And it was interesting that for me, and they actually had an atmospheric map as well, but this particular snowstorm happened weeks after the earthquake in Haiti in early 2010, paralyzed the entire city. So the Washington Post decided to use the Ushahidi platform to create a map for basically residents to map what was going on and what they needed help on. But what was really important, and for me, a paradigm shift, is that they were not only crowdsourcing problems, they were crowdsourcing solutions. Because we know full well in a crisis, in a disaster, we're not all affected in the same way for political, socioeconomic reasons and so on, luck. Some of us are more affected than others. And I like to think that those of us who are less affected, one of the first reactions that we have is, shoot, like, I want to help. How can I help? I want to help others in need, right? And what they were doing with this map then is creating a self-help map. So we think about maps as static, paper-based kind of posters. But here we have a live, dynamic map that can actually help match needs with resources, help crowdsource agency, crowdsource response. Because we know full well that disaster responders are not going to be at the corner of every street in every city around the world, right? But the crowd is always there. So why not make use of the crowd in ways that are perhaps more efficient if we can start using these live crisis maps as self-help maps, basically connecting those in need with those who have offers to help. And so I'm thinking what we really need is a Match.com of humanitarian response. Right? They do this very well for dating, I hear. So matching local people and so on who have similar interests. Why not use similar technology to map local needs with local offers for help and materials and resources, right? Because a search and rescue team from Iceland, yeah, they'll get there maybe about 72 hours later, but the crowd is always there. So let's connect these systems, these ecosystems, as much as we possibly can. So that's my talk. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand it over to Albert. Thank you.